Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a common writing question, and that is, are you your characters? Look, whenever a group of writers get together, there's always a series of questions and topics that inevitably come up. I refer to this phenomenon as the writer's interrogation list, and I've blogged about it quite a few times before, so all the links to those previous posts are below. One question that authors are often asked is, are you your characters? Or, worded slightly different, how much of you goes into your characters? Most authors would scoff at such a question and find the idea of an author surrogate, a fictional character that is based on themselves, slightly insulting to both their imagination and the craft of writing. Author surrogates are a writing technique typically associated with hobbyist writing. The fanfiction community has even given these characters a nickname, Mary Sue. A few authors, very few authors, openly admit to using author surrogates. Some famous examples are Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, though Vonnegut's literal appearance in the novel is maybe more meta than surrogate, but the narrative itself is heavily based on the author's experiences during the bombing in Dresden. Robert A. Heinlein also based the protagonist of Strangers in a Strange Land on himself. Like everything in life, there are examples of author surrogates that have been done very well. However, those examples are the exception, not the rule. Typically, author surrogates are a big fat no-no. Sometimes, the narrator of a story is flagged as an author surrogate due to the heavy-handed social, political, or philosophical commentary. I'll return to this idea later, but first I want to discuss the idea of an author basing their fictional character on themselves. If an author intentionally buries aspects of their personality or experiences into a character, then that's their decision, and they may have very good reasons for doing this. But if a reader is intentionally picking a character apart in order to find out things about the author, that's not so good. As artists, the line between us and our work becomes very blurry very quickly. On one hand, a book can be very telling as the author may embed beliefs, values, opinions, or real-life experiences into their work. But writing is a strategic exercise. Sometimes characters think or do things that are actually the opposite to what an author would do. But they do these things because it makes sense for the actual character themselves and because the plot needs to progress. However, some may argue that all characters are a reflection of the author. After all, the author is the one who created them. If you've been following my channel or my blog for a while, then you'll know that I'm self-publishing my mystery novel Every Time He Dies. In creating this video about how much of the author goes into the character, I naturally started thinking about how much of me is in my protagonist. In terms of the entire cast in my novel, some characters are completely fabricated, and some are almost the polar opposite to me, while others are more an exaggerated slither of my personality. It's a weird thing to think about because we actually aren't that unique. We all think fairly similar thoughts, we all feel fairly similar feelings and do fairly similar things. Insert obvious banal disclaimer here. Given this inherent sameness, and the fact that I wrote the damn book, it makes sense that some of the characters resemble me, slightly. Fortunately, my main character Daph could never be described as an author surrogate. We share very few things in common. Of course, there are a handful of things that we do have in common. We're both Australian females who grew up in Queensland and we're similar in age. Of course, these similarities mean that we share other similar qualities too, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. The biggest difference between me and my protagonist is our personalities and temperament. Daph loves gardening, science, and cutting up dead bodies. If she were an animal, she'd be an ox. Stubborn, slow, but relentless. I, however, am none of those things. I did pretty darn well at high school biology, but that was over 10 years ago, and I haven't cracked the spine of a science textbook since the day I sat my final exam. Fucking aced it too. I don't love science with a capital L. In fact, my good grades in biology were a freaking miracle because I flat out refused to dissect rats, to chop up grasshoppers, or to pull apart organs. What can I say? Cutting up dead shit freaks me out. Little wonder I haven't eaten meat for 12 years. Additionally, I find gardening tedious and boring, like solitaire kind of boring, like post office queues kind of boring. And if I were an animal, I guess I'd be a dragon because that's what Chinese astrology assigned my birth year. All that being said, there is a character in my book that feels a little bit more like my alter ego. I wouldn't describe this character as a Mary Sue, a term that is typically reserved for idealized versions of the author. The character that does most resemble me is Melissa Sweet. She's a Harley-riding metalhead that wears heavy makeup and way too much silver jewelry. Yeah, she's pretty cool and she kind of is like my alter ego, but in another way, in reality, I'm like way too introverted for her adrenaline-laced lifestyle. Looking at my cast of characters, the one that appears to be the most fabricated, the least like me, are all of the minor characters. The characters who I created and who exist in order to keep the cogs turning or to bring comic relief. Obviously, my main character propels the story forward the most, and so they share similarities with me because I need to have a strong understanding of who they are in order for the plot to make sense. Having pondered all this, I suspect that the greatest amount of ourselves probably winds up in our first novels. When examining my short stories, for example, I gotta say there really isn't that much of me in them. Maybe this is because the motivation behind writing a short story, for me, is to challenge myself and my skill levels rather than exploring a philosophical theme. Some of these challenges include writing a story where a protagonist makes you feel morally uncomfortable. I explored this in my short story Sydney Cherry. I also wanted to explore a story that used classic horror tropes, so I wrote a short story called The Bell. And then I really wanted to explore the idea of metafiction, particularly as it relates to writing, so I wrote a short story called Haunted. The link to all of these published short stories are below. You're welcome. As I mentioned at the top of this blog, sometimes the narrator is an author surrogate. While I have no doubt that there are sprinkles of me in my characters, it is the novel itself that is the greatest representation of me. After all, I didn't write a novel about grief and time, family, friendship, post-traumatic stress and trauma because these topics are uninteresting to me. Are you your characters? Is a dull question. Some novels are made to be consumed and closed. Others are made to be contemplated. It's within the pages of the book as a whole that you will gain the greatest insight into an author's psyche. You can dissect characters if you wish, but to do so is to miss the point. It's not about how much of the author has gone into the book, but what is the author trying to say with the book? There you have it, guys. That's all I got for you this week. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please click the subscribe button to support my channel, but more importantly, so you stay up to date whenever I load a new video. Know that you can always check out my website, taraeast.com. If you sign up for my weekly newsletter, you'll gain access to my free downloadable copy of the Writers Kickstarter Pack, How to Start a Blog and Get Published, just as a little thank you. Everyone who signs up to my email newsletter will get a notification once a week, every Thursday morning, to tell you about my latest upload, my latest blog, and what's going on. Here you'll gain access to content that I only share via email. You can also follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I hope you guys have had a fantastic week. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you again next time.